some people never came home from their vacations. Tonight, you'll find out why. Sarah and Mike had waited 3 years to afford their dream beach house rental. When they finally pulled up to the coastal property in Oregon, everything looked perfect. White sand beaches, crashing waves, and a cute 2-story cottage that seemed straight out of a postcard. But perfection doesn't last forever. The house sat between 2 other properties. On the left was a cheerful yellow beach house with a family that waved as they unloaded their car. On the right stood a dark gray house with boarded windows and an overgrown yard. The real estate photos had somehow cropped that house out completely. Probably just a renovation project, Mike said, though his voice carried doubt. That first night, they sat on the back deck watching the sunset. The sky turned orange and pink and everything felt magical. Sarah leaned against Mike's shoulder, finally relaxing after months of stressful work. Then she saw him. In the upstairs window of the gray house, a man stood perfectly still. His face was pressed against the glass, and even from 30 feet away, Sarah could see his eyes were fixed directly on them. Not just glancing, staring. Hard. "Mike, look," she whispered. When Mike turned, the man didn't move, didn't blink, didn't shift his gaze even slightly. He just kept staring with an expression that was completely blank, emotionless. "Dead? Maybe he's curious about new neighbors," Mike offered, but his hand tightened on Sarah's. They waited for the man to wave or smile or do anything normal. He didn't. For 45 full minutes, he stood frozen in that window, watching them like they were animals in a zoo. The dark room behind him made his pale face appear to float in the darkness. Finally, they went inside, but Sarah couldn't shake the image. That night, she kept the bedroom curtains closed tight. The next day seemed normal. Mike went for a morning jog while Sarah made coffee. But when she glanced out the kitchen window, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The man was in his backyard, standing behind a tree, watching their house. Not doing yard work, not checking his property, just standing, watching. She texted Mike immediately. "Don't come back the usual way. The neighbor is watching." Mike changed his route, coming through the front instead. When he got home, Sarah showed him where the man had been standing. They could see the spot clearly, a worn patch of grass behind the tree trunk where someone had stood many times before. "We should call someone," Sarah said. "And say what? A guy is standing in his own yard?" She knew Mike was right. They hadn't done anything illegal. But every instinct in her body screamed that something was deeply wrong. That evening, they decided to eat dinner inside instead of on the deck. As Sarah washed dishes, she happened to look up at the window. Her hands froze in the soapy water. The man was standing in his driveway now, closer than before. His arms hung limply at his sides. His head tilted at a strange angle. And his eyes, God, his eyes never left their house. Sarah could see his chest rising and falling with breath, proof he was alive. But everything else about him seemed inhuman. "Mike," she called out, her voice shaking. By the time Mike reached the kitchen, the man had moved again. Now he stood at the edge of their property line, maybe 15 feet from their back door. Close enough that they could see the stubble on his face. Close enough to see that he wasn't blinking. Mike grabbed his phone and stepped outside. "Hey, can we help you with something?" The man's head slowly turned toward Mike. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that belongs in nightmares. Too wide, showing too many teeth, completely wrong. He raised one hand and pointed directly at Sarah through the kitchen window. His finger remained extended for several seconds before he turned and walked back to his house in slow, deliberate steps. He never looked back. He didn't need to. The message was clear. I see you. That night, they pushed the bedroom dresser against the door. Every small sound made them jump. The house creaked and settled, but each noise felt like footsteps. Sarah finally fell asleep around 3 a.m., exhausted from fear. She woke up at 4:30 to a tapping sound. Tap, tap, tap. It came from the window. Their second-floor bedroom window. "Mike, wake up," she whispered urgently, shaking his shoulder. The tapping continued. Slow and rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. Mike sat up, his face pale even in the darkness. They both stared at the curtain, watching it flutter slightly with each tap. Someone was on the other side, touching their window, but they were on the second floor. There was no balcony, no ladder visible when they'd checked the property. How was someone reaching their window? Mike grabbed the bat they'd unpacked earlier, his hands shaking. He crept toward the window while Sarah called 911, whispering their address to the dispatcher. The tapping stopped. Mike yanked open the curtain. Nothing. No one. Just the empty night and the sound of waves crashing on the beach. "I swear to God, someone was there," Sarah said when the police arrived 20 minutes later. The officers searched the property with flashlights. They found marks on the side of the house, fresh scratches in the paint leading up to their window. Something or someone had climbed up. The officers examined the scratches with their flashlights, exchanging glances that made Sarah's stomach drop. "Ma'am, has anyone been bothering you since you arrived?" one officer asked. Sarah told them about the neighbor, about the watching, about the pointing, about the smile. The officers went next door and knocked. No answer. They knocked again, louder. Still nothing. One officer walked around back while the other stayed at the front door. After 5 minutes, they returned to Sarah and Mike. "House appears empty," the officer said. "But we found something you should know about." The back door was open, and there were photos inside. "Photos of what?" Mike asked. "Photos of your house. Dozens of them. Different angles, different times of day. Some were taken before you arrived." Sarah felt her legs go weak. "What?" "And there were photos of previous renters, too. The house has been watched for a while. We're going to station a car outside tonight, but I strongly suggest you leave in the morning." They didn't wait until morning. They packed their bags in 15 minutes, threw everything in the car, and drove away at 5 a.m. As they pulled out of the driveway, Sarah looked back one last time. The man stood in his upstairs window again, watching them leave. But this time he was holding something up to the glass. Sarah squinted, trying to see what it was. A photo. He was holding up a photo of their car pulling into the driveway 3 days earlier. He'd been waiting for them. The police later discovered the man had been evicted from the property months earlier, but had been secretly living in the crawl space under the house. He had watched every family that rented the beach house, taking photos, learning their routines, climbing up to their windows at night. Sarah still has nightmares about that blank face in the window. She sees it sometimes in crowds, that same empty stare. She and Mike never went on another beach vacation. Some places are beautiful during the day, but what happens after dark stays with you forever. Story 2. The Cabin in the Woods. Jessica's bachelorette party was supposed to be perfect. 6 college friends, 1 mountain cabin in Colorado, and a weekend of celebration before her wedding. The cabin rental had 5-star reviews and looked amazing in photos. Exposed wooden beams, a stone fireplace, huge windows overlooking pine forests, and complete isolation for miles. No cell service, total privacy, and hot tub under the stars, the listing promised. They arrived on Friday afternoon in 2 cars, laughing and singing along to throwback songs from their college days. The drive up the mountain was beautiful, winding roads through dense forest, the occasional deer darting across the path. The cabin appeared around a final bend, even more stunning than the photos. "This is incredible," Jessica's maid of honor, Amanda, squealed as they parked. The key was under the mat, just as the host had promised in his message. They unlocked the door and stepped into a space that smelled like pine and wood smoke. Everything was perfect: the furniture, the kitchen, the views. They chose bedrooms, unpacked wine and snacks, and settled in for a perfect weekend. The first strange thing happened at dinner. They were cooking pasta, dancing in the kitchen, when Rachel noticed something odd. "Hey, there are 6 plates out," she said, counting them on the counter. "We only need 6, but I only set out 5. "You probably just lost count," Amanda laughed, pouring more wine. But Jessica had seen Rachel set the table. There had been 5 plates. She was sure of it. Still, with wine flowing and music playing, she pushed the thought away. Probably just a mistake. That night, they sat in the hot tub under a sky filled with more stars than any of them had ever seen. No light pollution this far from the city meant the Milky Way stretched above them like a river of light. Everything felt magical. "I'm so happy we did this," Jessica said, feeling tears prick her eyes. Around midnight, they went inside, exhausted and happy. The cabin had 3 bedrooms, 2 doubles and 1 single. Jessica and Amanda shared the master bedroom. Rachel and Sophie took the 2nd bedroom. Morgan and Beth took the single rooms. Jessica fell asleep quickly, dreaming of her upcoming wedding. She woke up at 2:47 a.m. to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Heavy footsteps. Back and forth, she nudged Amanda. "Are the girls still awake?" Amanda listened. Maybe someone is going to the bathroom? But the footsteps continued for 10 minutes. Just walking, back and forth outside their door. Never stopping. Never going into any room. Just walking. Jessica got up and opened the door. The hallway was empty. All the other bedroom doors were closed. The footsteps had stopped the instant she touched the doorknob. "Hello?" she called softly. Silence. She checked the bathroom. Empty. She knocked gently on each bedroom door. Everyone was asleep. She stood in the hallway, her heart pounding, trying to convince herself she'd imagined it. But Amanda had heard it too. Back in bed, she couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, listening for any sound. Around 3:15 a.m., she heard something new. A door opening downstairs. The front door unmistakably. The distinct creak and click. She shook Amanda harder this time. "Someone just opened the front door." "What?" "I heard it." Someone opened the front door. They crept out of bed and into the hallway. Rachel's door opened too. She'd heard it as well. The 3 women stood at the top of the stairs, staring down into the dark living room. The front door was closed. Nothing looked disturbed. "I'm calling the owner," Jessica whispered, but then remembered no cell service. The listing had mentioned it specifically. "There's supposed to be a landline," Rachel said, "in the kitchen." They went downstairs together, turning on every light. Everything looked exactly as they'd left it. Doors locked, Windows closed. Nothing moved or missing. They found the old rotary phone on the kitchen wall and picked it up. Dead. No dial tone. Maybe the storm knocked it out, Amanda suggested. Though there had been no storm. They checked every door and window, making sure everything was locked tight. Then they dragged blankets and pillows to the living room and decided to sleep there together. Safety in numbers. Jessica dozed off around 4 a.m. She woke 2 hours later to morning sun streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee. Sophie was making breakfast, completely unaware of the night's events. "You guys slept out here?" Sophie asked, confused. They explained what happened. Sophie and Morgan had heard nothing. Beth's room was at the back of the cabin, and she'd taken sleeping pills, so she'd been unconscious all night. "Old houses make noise," Morgan said practically. "The wood expands and contracts. Could sound like footsteps." Jessica wanted to believe her. She really did. That day, they hiked to a nearby waterfall, went kayaking on the lake, and tried to enjoy themselves. But Jessica kept looking over her shoulder. The forest felt like it was watching them. Between the trees, she thought she saw movement several times, but whenever she looked directly, there was nothing there. That evening, they built a fire in the fireplace and roasted marshmallows. The mood was lighter. The weirdness from last night felt far away. Around 9 p.m., Beth went upstairs to take a shower. Jessica heard the water turn on through the old pipes. 10 minutes later, she heard Beth scream. They all ran upstairs. Beth stood in the hallway in her towel, shaking and pointing at her bedroom door. "Someone was in there," she said, her voice trembling. "I heard them moving around while I was in the shower." "The cabin's empty," Amanda said gently. "We're all down here." "I heard them," Beth insisted. "They were opening drawers, walking around. I thought it was one of you looking for something." They checked her room together. Everything looked normal except for one thing. The closet door was open. Beth swore she'd left it closed, and inside the closet, pushed to the very back behind the hanging clothes, they found a sleeping bag. It was warm to the touch. Recently used. "What the fuck?" Rachel breathed. They tore through every closet, every room, checking under beds, in bathrooms, anywhere someone could hide. In the basement, behind old furniture and boxes, they found more evidence. Empty food wrappers, water bottles, a camping stove, and worst of all, a notebook. Amanda opened it with shaking hands. Inside were pages and pages of handwritten notes. Dates, times, observations. It was a log of every group that had stayed in this cabin for the past 6 months. Family of 4. Arrived Friday 3 p.m. Left door unlocked second night. Couple. Anniversary trip. She sleeps on right side. He snores. Bachelor party, 8 men. Drunk by 8 p.m. Easy. The entries went on and on. Detailed notes about people's habits, their schedules, where they slept, when they were most vulnerable. The final entry was about them, 6 women. Bachelorette party. Arrived 2 p.m., hot tub until midnight. Master bedroom, 2 sleeping. Too many to approach. Wait. Jessica felt vomit rise in her throat. Someone had been watching them. Learning their patterns. Planning something, we need to leave. Right now, she said. They threw everything into bags, not bothering to clean or organize. They just wanted out. As they loaded the cars, Jessica noticed something that made her blood turn to ice. There were fresh boot prints in the dirt near the back of the cabin. Large prints. Men's size, probably 11 or 12. They led from the woods to the basement window and back again. Multiple sets. Someone had been going in and out. They drove down the mountain going way too fast, none of them speaking until they hit a town with cell service. Jessica immediately called the police. The investigation revealed that a homeless man had been living in the cabin's crawl spaces and basement for months, coming out at night when renters were asleep. He'd been stealing food, watching people through vents and gaps in the walls, and keeping detailed records. He had keys to all the doors. He'd been entering bedrooms while people slept, standing over beds, watching them breathe. The hot tub they'd enjoyed. He'd been in the woods 15 feet away, watching them the entire time. The owner claimed he had no knowledge of this, but police found evidence suggesting he'd been warned by previous renters and ignored the complaints because the bad reviews would hurt his business. Jessica canceled her bachelorette party memories, but she couldn't cancel the nightmares. For months afterward, she would wake up certain someone was standing in her room, watching her sleep. She'd check closets compulsively, triple lock doors, and couldn't stay in hotels without checking every inch of the room first. The wedding happened, but she never felt the same way about travel. Some violations of privacy run so deep they change you forever. Every cabin in the woods now looks sinister. Every isolated vacation rental could have someone living in its walls. The scariest part? They caught the man, but his notebook revealed he wasn't alone. He'd been communicating with others like him, sharing tips about which vacation rentals were easy targets. There's an entire underground network of people living in the hidden spaces of vacation homes, waiting for tourists to let their guard down. Jessica still has the police report. She reads it sometimes to remind herself it was real, that she wasn't paranoid. 6 women went to a cabin for a fun weekend. Someone watched every moment. And if they'd stayed one more night, the final entry in that notebook might have read very differently. Story 3. The resort with no exits. David and his wife Emma booked an all-inclusive resort in Mexico for their 10th anniversary. After years of budget vacations and staycations with their kids left with grandparents, they wanted something special. The resort looked perfect online. Oceanfront rooms, multiple pools, gourmet dining, and most importantly, total relaxation. They arrived on a Sunday afternoon after a long flight. The resort was enormous, sprawling across several acres with different buildings for different room categories. Their room was in Building C, a 10-minute walk from the main lobby and beach. "This place is huge," Emma said, as the bellhop led them down winding pathways through tropical gardens. Their room was beautiful. King-size bed, balcony overlooking gardens, modern bathroom, and all the amenities they'd expected. They unpacked quickly, changed into swimwear, and headed to the beach. The resort was less crowded than David expected for peak season. The beaches were nearly empty. The pools had plenty of available loungers. The restaurants had immediate seating. "Guess we got lucky," Emma said, sipping her welcome cocktail. That first night, they ate dinner at the Italian restaurant. The food was decent, the service was fine, but something felt slightly off. David couldn't put his finger on it. Maybe it was the staff's forced smiles or the way other guests seemed nervous rather than relaxed. Walking back to their room around 10 p.m., they got lost. The winding pathways all looked identical in the dark. Same plants, same lighting, same buildings. They wandered for 20 minutes before finally finding Building C. "We should take photos of the route tomorrow," Emma laughed. "This place is a maze." David woke up at 2 a.m. to strange sounds outside their balcony. Footsteps on gravel, hushed voices speaking rapid Spanish. and what sounded like furniture being moved. He went to the balcony door and peeked through the curtain. 3 men in resort uniforms were carrying something heavy wrapped in plastic sheeting. They moved quickly through the gardens, glancing around nervously. David watched them disappear toward the back of the property where the gardens gave way to jungle. Probably just moving furniture, he told himself, but his gut said otherwise. The next morning at breakfast, they struck up a conversation with an older American couple, the Richardsons, who'd been at the resort for 5 days. "How are you enjoying your stay?" Emma asked politely. Mrs. Richardson's smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's fine, though we've had some issues." "Oh?" David asked. "Well, you'll probably think we're crazy, but we think the resort is trying to keep us here longer than we paid for." "What do you mean?" Emma asked. Mr. Richardson leaned in, lowering his voice. "We were supposed to check out yesterday, but when we went to the front desk, they said our reservation showed checkout for next Sunday. When we showed them our confirmation email on my phone, they claimed their system was different and we must be mistaken." "That's just a mistake, surely," David said. "That's what we thought. But then when we insisted on leaving, they said the shuttle to the airport was fully booked for the next 3 days. We tried calling a taxi, but our phones can't get any signal. We asked to use the resort phone and the line was supposedly down. We're stuck until they say we can leave." Emma and David exchanged glances. "That did sound strange. Have you talked to other guests?" Emma asked. "A few. Most people don't seem to notice or care. But there's a young couple, the Harringtons, who've been here 12 days. They were supposed to leave 8 days ago." David's unease grew. "What does the resort say about that?" "They keep making excuses. Computer errors, booking mistakes, weather issues, something different every time." After breakfast, David tried his phone. No signal, just like the Richardson said. He went to the front desk to ask about Wi-Fi. "The Wi-Fi is down for maintenance," the clerk said with that same forced smile. "Should be back up in a day or two." "A day or two? We need to check in with our kids. Is there a phone we can use?" "The landline is also down. We had a storm last week that damaged the telecommunications equipment." "But there wasn't a storm," David said. He'd checked the weather before booking. The clerk's smile never wavered. "Perhaps it was before you arrived, sir. Can I help you with anything else? More restaurant reservations, perhaps?" David backed away slowly. Something was very wrong. That afternoon, while Emma was at the spa, David decided to explore. He walked toward the back of the property, following the route he'd seen those men take the previous night. The gardens ended at a tall stone wall covered in flowering vines. He followed the wall until he found a service gate slightly ajar. He shouldn't have gone through it. But curiosity pushed him forward. Beyond the gate, the manicured gardens gave way to overgrown jungle paths. He followed what looked like a trail, pushing through palm fronds and stepping over roots. After a few minutes, he reached a clearing with several small buildings. Storage sheds, he assumed. He tried the door of the first one. Locked. Same with the second. But the third door swung open easily. Inside, he found suitcases. Dozens of them. Different sizes, different brands, all piled haphazardly. Some were expensive leather luggage. Others were budget canvas bags. All had tags with names and dates written in marker. David's heart raced as he read the tags. Morrison family. Departed March 15th. Chen. Alakia departed April. Rodriguez. Departed April 8. But wait. It was only April 10th. These people had supposedly departed, but their luggage was here? He took photos with his phone, even though he couldn't send them without service. As he backed out of the shed, he heard voices approaching. He quickly closed the door and hid behind a nearby building. 2 resort security guards walked past, speaking in Spanish. David's Spanish was rusty, but he caught enough to make his blood run cold. ¿Cuántos tenemos ahora? How many do we have now? 32. 32. El jefe dice que necesitamos más antes de que llegue el barco. The boss says we need more before the boat arrives. The guards passed, and David ran back through the jungle, through the service gate and into the resort grounds. His mind raced. 32 what? 32 guests? And what boat? He found Emma in their room, fresh from her spa treatment. David, you look terrible. What happened? He told her everything. The Richardson story. The shed full of luggage, the guard's conversation. Emma's face went pale. We need to leave. Now, she said. I don't think they're going to let us. They packed quickly and headed to the front desk. David demanded to check out immediately, but the clerk just smiled that awful smile and said their reservation showed 3 more days. When David got angry, security appeared within seconds. Sir, we don't want to cause a scene, the head of security said quietly. Why don't we discuss this in the office? No, Emma said firmly. We're leaving. We'll walk to the road and flag down a car. The security guard's expression hardened. I'm afraid that's not safe. The area outside the resort is very dangerous. Cartel activity. We can't allow guests to put themselves at risk. You can't keep us here, David said. Of course not, sir. You're free to enjoy all the resort amenities while we sort out this booking confusion. I'm sure it will be resolved shortly. 2 more security guards appeared. The message was clear. They weren't leaving. Back in their room, Emma started crying. What do we do? David thought frantically. The resort was enormous. There had to be another way out besides the main entrance. That night, after midnight, they would try to escape through the back, through that service gate and into the jungle. But first, they needed to warn other guests. At dinner, they carefully approached the Harringtons, the young couple the Richardsons had mentioned. When David quietly explained what he'd found, the Harringtons revealed they'd discovered something too. A second shed containing pallets of drugs wrapped in plastic, exactly like what David had seen the men carrying that first night. The resort is a front, Mr. Harrington whispered. They're using it to traffic drugs and trap tourists for ransom or worse. That's why they keep extending our stays. The longer we're here, the more they can charge to our credit cards, and the more leverage they have over us. We need to get to the embassy, Emma said. How? We have no phones, no internet, and they're watching us constantly. That night, a group of 8 guests met secretly in the Richardsons' room. David and Emma, the Richardsons, the Harringtons, and 2 other couples who'd also been trying to leave. They formed a plan. At 3 a.m., they would split up. 4 would create a distraction at the main building, while the other 4 attempted to escape through the jungle. If anyone made it to the main road, they'd flag down help and contact authorities. The plan was desperate and dangerous, but staying felt more dangerous. At 2:55 a.m., David and Emma crept out of their room. The resort was eerily quiet. Security patrolled with flashlights, but there were patterns, gaps in coverage. They reached the service gate and slipped through into the jungle. 2 other couples were right behind them. They followed the path David had found earlier, using phone flashlights despite the risk of being spotted. Behind them, shouting erupted. The distraction team had set off fire alarms in the main building. Run! David urged. They crashed through the jungle, branches tearing at clothes and skin. Emma fell once and David pulled her up. They could hear security behind them closing in. The jungle seemed endless. David's lungs burned. Just when he thought they couldn't go further, they broke through to a dirt road. A truck was approaching. David ran into the middle of the road, waving frantically. The truck stopped. The driver, a local farmer, took one look at their terrified faces and bloodied clothes and understood. He gestured urgently for them to get in the back. As they drove away, David looked back. Security guards stood at the jungle's edge, watching but not pursuing. They'd let them go. Maybe 8 guests wasn't worth the risk of exposure. At the nearest police station, the stories poured out. The police were skeptical at first until David showed his photos of the luggage shed. A raid was organized. The investigation revealed the resort had been kidnapping guests for months, holding them for ransom, and using the resort as a cover for drug trafficking. Guests who couldn't pay or whose families couldn't be contacted simply disappeared. The departed luggage belonged to people who would never go home. 32 guests were rescued during the raid. 12 bodies were found in the jungle. The resort's management and security were all arrested, part of a cartel operation that had been running for over 3 years. David and Emma made it home, but they can never forget the faces of the staff with their forced smiles. They think about the people whose luggage they found, wonder who they were, whether they had families waiting. They think about how close they came to being among those who never left. Emma can't look at resort brochures anymore. The pictures all look sinister now, hiding what might be underneath the luxury facade. Because sometimes paradise is a prison with better decor. And sometimes checking in is easy. It's checking out that becomes impossible. Story 4: The Overnight Train. Melissa was traveling solo through India, fulfilling a lifelong dream of seeing the Taj Mahal. She'd booked an overnight sleeper train from Delhi to Agra, the cheapest option for budget travelers. The train was old but functional, with compartments containing 6 sleeping berths, 3 on each side, stacked vertically. She boarded around 9 p.m., finding her assigned middle berth in a mixed compartment. A family occupied 3 of the bunks: a mother, father, and teenage daughter. An elderly man had the lower berth across from them. That left one berth empty, the upper one directly above Melissa. "Is someone sitting there?" Melissa asked the family, pointing to the empty space. "Not yet," the father replied in accented English. "Perhaps no one booked it." "Lucky for you, more room." The train lurched forward, beginning its journey through the night. Melissa changed into comfortable clothes in the tiny bathroom at the end of the car, brushed her teeth, and climbed into her berth. The family closed their curtains for privacy. The elderly man was already snoring softly. Melissa lay in the semi-darkness, listening to the rhythmic clacking of wheels on tracks. She dozed off around 10:30. She woke to the sensation of someone climbing into the berth above her. The metal frame creaked under shifting weight. She assumed the final passenger had boarded at one of the stops. She went back to sleep. At 1 a.m., she woke again. Something felt wrong. The train was stopped at a station, and she could hear normal station sounds. Vendors calling out, people boarding, luggage being loaded. But above her, she heard breathing. Heavy, deliberate breathing. Then she heard something that made her freeze. A zipper slowly being pulled. It came from the berth above her. Someone was opening something inch by inch, trying to be quiet. Melissa held her breath, listening. The zipper stopped. Then came a different sound, rustling like someone going through a bag. Her bag. Her backpack was on the upper berth because there wasn't space on her middle bunk. Someone was going through her things. "Hey," she called out, sitting up. "That's my bag." The rustling stopped instantly. The curtain of the upper berth whipped aside, and a man's face appeared, looking down at her. In the dim light, she could make out rough features, yellowed teeth, and cold eyes. Sorry, he said in heavily accented English. "Wrong bag. I thought this was mine." "Your berth is marked on your ticket," Melissa said, her voice shaking. "That's not your spot." "So sorry, madam." "My mistake." He climbed down from the berth with her backpack in his hands. "That's mine," she said firmly, reaching for it. He held it just out of reach. "I was just checking. I thought someone put my bag up there." The father from the family across from them stirred, opening his curtain. "Is there a problem?" The man immediately handed Melissa her backpack and climbed back up to the upper berth. "No problem. Just confusion." Melissa checked her bag frantically. Her wallet was still there, passport still there, but her phone was missing. She'd left it in the outside pocket. "He took my phone," she said to the father. "Are you sure?" "Check carefully." She checked again. Definitely gone. "Excuse me?" she called up to the man. "You took my phone." "I know you did. Please give it back." "I don't have your phone, madam. Perhaps you left it somewhere." "Give it back or I'm calling the police at the next station." The man laughed. "Call them with what phone, madam?" The father intervened, speaking rapidly in Hindi to the man above. Their conversation grew heated. Finally, the man tossed Melissa's phone down. It landed on her berth. "There. Happy now? It was in your bag the whole time. You just didn't see it." Melissa knew that was a lie, but at least she had her phone back. She clutched her backpack tightly and tried to stay awake, but exhaustion pulled at her. Around 2 a.m., her eyes closed despite her best efforts. She woke to pressure on her chest. Someone's hand was pressing down on her, holding her down. In her groggy state, it took a moment to understand what was happening. The man from the upper berth was leaning down from above, his arm extended through the gap between berths, his hand on her chest. Slowly moving lower, Melissa screamed. The whole compartment erupted. Lights came on. The family woke up. The elderly man shouted. The father grabbed the man's arm and yanked him hard, nearly pulling him out of his berth. "What are you doing?" the father roared. "Nothing. I was just reaching for something I dropped." "You lying piece of filth," the mother said, standing up. She was small but fierce. "We heard exactly what you were doing." The conductor arrived within minutes, summoned by the family's shouting. He took one look at the situation and began yelling at the man in Hindi. The man was forced to gather his things and was moved to a different car, but not removed from the train. "He should be arrested," Melissa said, still shaking. The conductor shrugged. "At the next station, you can file a complaint with railway police." But the next station came and went. The conductor never returned to help her file that complaint. Melissa realized with sinking horror that reporting it would mean delays, paperwork, and possibly staying alone in an unfamiliar station in the middle of the night. She was too scared to risk it. The family invited her to sleep in their teenage daughter's berth. The girl moved to her mother's berth, and Melissa gratefully accepted. She didn't sleep the rest of the night, just lay there staring at the ceiling, jumping at every sound. When they finally arrived in Agra at 6 a.m., the family walked her to a taxi and made sure she got safely to her hotel. The father gave her his phone number. "If you need anything, call us," he said. "I'm sorry this happened in my country. This is not who we are." Melissa thanked them profusely. They had probably saved her from something far worse. She spent one day in Agra, saw the Taj Mahal, and immediately booked a flight back to Delhi instead of taking the return train. The extra cost didn't matter. She couldn't face another overnight train. Later, she researched online and found dozens of similar stories. Solo women travelers assaulted, robbed, or worse on overnight trains. Some attacks were reported, but most weren't. The shame, the fear of not being believed, the language barriers, all of it kept victims silent. Melissa made it home safely, but she never traveled alone again. That train ride taught her that some dangers come when you're most vulnerable. Trapped in a small space with nowhere to run while strangers have access to you in the dark. The Taj Mahal was beautiful, but when she looks at her photos, all she remembers is that man's face looming over her in the darkness, his hand on her chest, and the helplessness of being trapped on a moving train with someone who saw her as prey. Story 5. The island resort Thomas and his boyfriend Kyle booked a week at an exclusive island resort in Thailand. It was a splurge for their 5-year anniversary, the kind of place with over-water bungalows, private beaches, and staff who remembered your name. The resort was on a small private island, accessible only by the resort's own boat. They arrived on a beautiful Saturday afternoon, taking the 45-minute boat ride from the mainland. The resort was paradise, crystal clear water, white sand beaches, and lush jungle. Only 20 bungalows total, ensuring privacy and tranquility. Their bungalow sat at the end of a pier, suspended over turquoise water. Glass panels in the floor let them watch fish swimming below. A private deck had steps leading directly into the ocean. Everything was perfect. "This is incredible," Kyle said, wrapping his arms around Thomas from behind as they stood on the deck. That first evening, they had dinner at the main restaurant, a beautiful open-air pavilion with views of the sunset. The food was excellent, the service impeccable. They met a few other couples, honeymooners mostly, and one older retired couple celebrating their 40th anniversary. "Everyone seems lovely," Kyle said as they walked back to their bungalow under a sky full of stars. Thomas agreed. Everything felt magical. On their second night, around 2 a.m., Thomas woke to strange sounds. Splashing water, but not normal wave sounds. This was rhythmic, like someone swimming near their bungalow. He got up and looked out at the dark ocean. At first, he saw nothing. Then he spotted movement maybe 20 feet from their deck. Someone was in the water, swimming back and forth, back and forth. In the middle of the night, "Kyle, wake up," he whispered. Kyle joined him at the window. "What the hell? Who goes swimming at 2 a.m.? As they watched, the swimmer moved closer. Close enough that the deck lights illuminated them. It was a man, pale-skinned, wearing only dark swim shorts. His movements were odd, too smooth, too deliberate. He wasn't exercising or enjoying a late-night swim. He was circling their bungalow like a shark. "Should we say something?" Kyle asked. Before Thomas could answer, the man dove underwater and disappeared. They waited, watching the dark water. 5 minutes passed. 10. The swimmer never surfaced. "Where did he go?" Thomas said, pressing his face against the glass floor panel. Maybe he went back to his bungalow, but something felt very wrong. People don't hold their breath that long, and there were no nearby bungalows. Theirs was the most isolated one. They eventually went back to bed, but Thomas couldn't shake the unease. He kept imagining that pale figure surfacing right beneath their glass floor, staring up at them through the clear panels. The next morning at breakfast, they mentioned the incident to the staff. A late-night swimmer? The manager said, frowning. We discourage swimming after dark for safety reasons. Did you see which bungalow they came from? No, Thomas said. They disappeared underwater and we never saw them come up. The manager's frown deepened. That's unusual. I'll remind all guests about safety protocols. That afternoon, Thomas and Kyle went snorkeling. The water was warm and clear, teeming with colorful fish and coral. They swam away from the resort, exploring the reef that encircled the island. Kyle grabbed Thomas's arm underwater, pointing frantically. Through the blue water, Thomas saw something that made his heart stop. A body was floating face down in the water about 30 feet away, caught in the coral. They surfaced, gasping. Did you see that? Kyle sputtered. There's a body! They swam quickly back to the resort and reported it immediately. The staff launched a boat and went to investigate. Thomas and Kyle waited on the beach with growing dread. The boat returned an hour later. The manager approached them with a strange expression on his face. There was nothing there, he said. We searched the entire area. No body, no evidence of anything. We both saw it, Thomas insisted. Face down in the coral. Perhaps it was a piece of debris. In the water, things can look distorted. But Thomas knew what he'd seen. That was a human body. That night, they locked all the doors and windows of their bungalow, despite the heat. Thomas couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. At 3 a.m., he woke to scratching sounds underneath the bungalow. Something was scraping against the wooden pillars that held their structure above the water. Slow, methodical scratching, like nails on wood. He woke Kyle silently, pointing down. They both listened, barely breathing. The scratching continued, moving from one pylon to another, circling the entire bungalow. Then came the sound of wet footsteps on their deck outside. Thomas's blood turned to ice. Someone had climbed out of the water and was walking around their private deck. The footsteps approached the door. The handle jiggled, testing the lock. Kyle grabbed his phone to call for help, but there was no signal. The resort had Wi-Fi only in the main building, and the emergency phone in their room was dead when Kyle tried it. We're trapped, Kyle whispered. The door handle stopped moving. The footsteps walked to the window instead. Thomas couldn't help himself. He peeked through a gap in the curtains. A face stared back at him. The same pale man from the night before was pressed against their window, water streaming down his face, his eyes wide and unblinking. His mouth hung open, and in the dim light, Thomas could see that his lips were blue. His skin wrinkled like he'd been underwater for hours. Thomas stumbled backward with a strangled cry. Kyle looked and saw the face too. They huddled in the center of the room, as far from the windows as possible. The wet footsteps continued circling the bungalow for what felt like hours. Every few minutes, a face would appear at a different window, always the same pale man, always staring with those dead eyes. As soon as dawn broke, the footsteps stopped. When Thomas finally worked up the courage to look outside, the deck was empty except for wet footprints leading back to the water's edge. They packed immediately and demanded to be taken to the mainland. The manager tried to convince them to stay, offering refunds and upgrades, but they insisted. Has anyone drowned here recently? Thomas asked as they waited for the boat. The manager hesitated. Why do you ask? Just answer the question. 3 months ago, a guest drowned while swimming at night. Against resort policy, which is why we have those rules. His body was never recovered. The currents took it out to sea. "What did he look like?" Kyle asked, though he already knew the answer. The manager showed them a photo from the resort's condolence page. It was him, the pale man, the midnight swimmer. On the boat ride back to the mainland, the captain told them more. The drowned man, Marcel, had been staying alone in the same bungalow Thomas and Kyle had occupied. He'd gone swimming drunk one night and never came back. His body disappeared into the ocean. Since then, night staff reported seeing a figure swimming near that bungalow. Some guests complained about scratching sounds and wet footsteps. The resort had tried blessing the bungalow, moving guests to different locations, but nothing helped. "Why did you put us there?" Thomas demanded. "Why didn't you warn us?" The captain shrugged. "Most people don't see anything, and the resort needs to rent all the bungalows. Business." Thomas and Kyle cut their trip short and flew home early. They lost money on the non-refundable portion of their booking, but they didn't care. Neither of them could ever look at tropical resort photos again without feeling sick. Kyle still has nightmares about that blue-lipped face pressed against the glass. Thomas can't take baths anymore because the sound of water reminds him of those wet footsteps circling their bungalow while something dead hunted them from the darkness. Paradise has a dark side, and sometimes guests check in but never really check out. Hari 6, the cruise ship. Linda and her sister Pamela had saved for 2 years to afford their dream Mediterranean cruise. 10 days sailing from Barcelona to Rome, stopping at gorgeous ports along the way. They boarded the massive ship with 3,000 other passengers, giddy with excitement. Their cabin was on deck 7, midship, an inside cabin with no windows to keep costs down. It was tiny but adequate, 2 twin beds, a small bathroom, and just enough space to unpack their suitcases. The first 2 days were wonderful. They explored the ship, ate at different restaurants, watched shows, and made friends with other passengers. At their first port stop in Monaco, they spent the day sightseeing and returned to the ship exhausted and happy. That night, Linda woke up at 4 a.m. feeling like someone was watching her. The cabin was pitch black. No windows meant no ambient light, just complete darkness. She reached for her phone to use as a flashlight, but it was dead despite being plugged in to charge. She lay there in the dark, listening. The ship's engines hummed below, air conditioning whispered through vents, and then she heard something else, breathing. Not Pamela's familiar breathing from the bed 3 feet away. This was different, closer. "Pam?" she whispered. Her sister didn't respond. Linda reached over and shook her bed. Pamela mumbled something and rolled over, clearly asleep. The other breathing continued. It was coming from the foot of Linda's bed. She lay frozen, too terrified to move. Her rational mind said it was impossible. The door was locked. They were on a ship in the middle of the ocean. No one could be in their room. But her instinct screamed that she wasn't alone. The breathing moved. It circled her bed slowly. She could hear it right next to her head now, feel the presence of someone standing over her in the darkness. Then she felt weight press down on the foot of her bed. Someone sat down. Linda's hand shot out, frantically feeling for the light switch on the wall. Her fingers found it and flipped it on. The room flooded with light. No one was there. Just Pamela sleeping soundly in the next bed and their cabin exactly as they'd left it. Linda got up and checked the door. Still locked, deadbolt engaged, security latch in place. The bathroom door was open, the tiny space clearly empty. She convinced herself she'd been dreaming, a hallucination in that disorienting moment between sleep and waking. She left the bathroom light on and eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, she mentioned it to Pamela over breakfast. "You probably just had a weird dream," Pamela said. "Those inside cabins can be creepy because they're so dark," Linda agreed. "Just a dream, but that night, it happened again. Same time, 4 a.m., same sensation of being watched, same breathing sounds. And this time she felt something else. Fingers touching her hair, gently stroking it. She screamed and turned on the light. Nothing." Pamela sat up, startled. "What's wrong?" "Someone touched me," Linda said, her voice shaking. They searched the tiny cabin thoroughly. Empty. They called security, who came and checked the room. Nothing. The security officer suggested Linda was experiencing sleep paralysis, a common occurrence where you wake up but can't move and often hallucinate. "But I could move," Linda insisted. "I turned on the light." The officer had no other explanation. He checked that their door locked properly and left. The next day in Rome, Linda barely enjoyed the sightseeing. She was exhausted from lack of sleep and dreading the coming night. That evening, she and Pamela decided to stay up late, hoping if they went to bed exhausted enough, Linda would sleep through till morning. They stayed at the ship's bar until 2 a.m., then returned to their cabin. Linda fell asleep immediately. She woke at 4 a.m. to pressure on her chest. Something heavy was pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. She couldn't move her arms. Sleep paralysis, she thought. That's all this is. But then she felt breath on her face. Hot, humid breath that smelled like rot and seawater. And a voice whispered directly in her ear, "You're in my bed." Linda's paralysis broke. She thrashed violently, screaming. The lights came on. Pamela was out of bed, hands on the light switch, staring at Linda in shock. What happened? "Someone was on top of me," Linda gasped, gulping air. "They spoke to me. They said I'm in their bed." This time when security came, Linda demanded to be moved to a different cabin. She didn't care about the cost. She couldn't spend another night in that room. "We're fully booked," the security officer said. "Every cabin is occupied. But let me check something." He pulled up the cabin's history on his tablet, and his expression changed. "Ma'am, I think we can move you. This cabin has had previous complaints." "What kind of complaints?" "Similar to yours. Guests reporting feeling watched, hearing breathing, feeling touched in the night." "Why didn't you tell us this when we checked in?" Pamela demanded. The incidents were investigated and determined to be psychological. Ships can be disorienting environments. People have nightmares. "This isn't a nightmare," Linda said firmly. The officer lowered his voice. "Between you and me, there was an incident in this cabin 3 years ago. A passenger died in this room. Heart attack in his sleep. We found him the next morning. Since then, some guests have reported experiences." Linda felt sick. She'd been sleeping in a dead man's bed. Something of him had stayed behind. They were moved to a cabin on Deck 9, a more expensive room with a balcony that someone had canceled last minute. For the rest of the cruise, Linda slept fine. No more 4 a.m. wake-ups, no more breathing sounds, no more touches. But on their last night before disembarking, she went down to Deck 7 out of curiosity. She walked past her old cabin and noticed something odd. The door was slightly ajar, and she could see the light was on inside. She peeked in. The cabin was empty, beds made, ready for the next passengers. But as she watched, the light flickered once, twice, then went out completely, plunging the cabin into darkness. From that darkness, she heard it one more time. Breathing. Slow, steady, waiting. Linda ran back to her new cabin and didn't leave it until the ship docked the next morning. She later learned that cabin 7142 has one of the highest complaint rates on the entire ship. Passengers regularly request room changes. The cruise line can't officially acknowledge it's haunted. That would be bad for business. But crew members all know to avoid that corridor late at night. Because something is still there. Still sleeping in that bed. Still waking at 4 a.m. Still looking for the warmth of the living to remind itself what it once was. Linda hasn't taken another cruise. Some ships carry more than just passengers. They carry the memories of everyone who ever sailed on them. And sometimes those memories refuse to disembark. Story 7. The Hostel Room. Jake was backpacking through Europe on a tight budget, staying in the cheapest hostels he could find. In Prague, he booked a bed in an 8-person dorm room for just $8 per night. The hostel had decent reviews and was centrally located. Perfect for a broke college student trying to see the world. He arrived late at night after a long bus journey from Vienna. The hostel was in an old building, the kind with narrow staircases and peeling wallpaper that suggested it had seen better decades. His dorm room was on the 4th floor, tucked at the end of a long hallway. He pushed open the door quietly, trying not to wake whoever was already sleeping. The room was dark except for a small nightlight near the door. He could make out the shapes of bunk beds, 4 sets, 8 beds total. His assigned bed was a top bunk in the far corner. He climbed up as quietly as possible and settled in. The mattress was thin but adequate. Through the darkness, he could hear the sounds of other people sleeping. Someone snoring lightly. Another person's deep breathing, the rustle of sheets. He fell asleep quickly, exhausted from travel. He woke up at 3:17 a.m. to complete silence. The snoring had stopped. No one was breathing that he could hear. The room felt different, heavier somehow. He lay there, eyes adjusting to the darkness. Slowly, shapes became clearer. He could see the other bunk beds now, and that's when he realized something was wrong. All 7 other beds were empty. Made up neatly as if no one had ever slept in them, but he'd heard people breathing when he fell asleep. He was certain of it. Jake sat up, his heart starting to pound. "Hello?" he called softly. Silence. Maybe everyone had gotten up early for some reason. But it was 3 a.m., and their belongings were gone too. No backpacks, no shoes under beds, nothing. He climbed down from his bunk and checked the room more carefully. Completely empty. Just him. That's weird, he thought, but tried not to panic. Maybe the hostel had made a mistake and put him in an empty room. He'd sort it out in the morning. He climbed back into bed, but sleep wouldn't come. The room felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. He kept his eyes open, staring at the ceiling. At 3:45 a.m., he heard the door creak open. Someone entered the room. He could hear footsteps, soft and deliberate. They walked to one of the lower bunks and stopped. Then came the sound of someone climbing into bed, the springs creaking under their weight. Jake leaned over the edge of his bunk to look down. In the dim light, he could see a figure lying in the bed directly below him. A person-shaped lump under the covers, completely still. "Hey," Jake whispered. "Sorry, I thought I was alone in here." No response. The figure didn't move. "Hello?" Still nothing. But Jake could see the covers rising and falling slightly. Someone was breathing. He decided to leave it alone. Maybe his new roommate was just exhausted and didn't want to chat. Jake tried to sleep again. At 4:30 a.m., another person entered. More footsteps. Another bunk creaked as someone got into bed. Then another at 5 a.m., and another at 5:30. By 6 a.m., he could see that all the other beds were now occupied. 7 lumps under covers, all perfectly still, all silent. When did these people arrive? He'd been awake the whole time and hadn't heard them bring in any luggage or belongings. They'd just walked in and gotten into empty beds. At 7 a.m., his alarm went off. Jake climbed down from his bunk, grabbed his backpack, and headed for the door. As he passed the other beds, he glanced at the sleeping figures. Every single one was facing the wall, covers pulled up over their heads. He couldn't see any of their faces. He went downstairs to the common area. The hostel was just waking up. A few travelers sat drinking coffee. The desk clerk was checking someone in. "Excuse me," Jake said to the clerk. "I'm in room 42. It was empty when I went to sleep, but then during the night, people kept coming in." "Who are my roommates?" The clerk checked the computer. "Room 42? You're the only person booked in that room. It's just you. That's impossible. There are 7 other people up there right now." The clerk's expression changed. "Sir, that room has been empty except for you. Are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine. Come up with me. I'll show you." The clerk looked reluctant but grabbed the master key. They went up to the 4th floor together. The clerk unlocked room 42 and pushed the door open. The room was empty. All 7 beds were neatly made. No signs anyone had slept in them. Jake's bunk was the only one disturbed, his blanket messy from where he'd been sleeping. "There were people here," Jake insisted. "I saw them." "All 7 beds were occupied an hour ago," the clerk sighed. "Sir, look, I'm going to be honest with you. Room 42 has a reputation. We usually don't book it unless the hostel is completely full. Guests report seeing things, hearing things. Nothing dangerous but unsettling." "What kind of things?" "People who aren't there. Sounds during the night. Most guests request to change rooms. Why didn't you tell me this?" "Because most people don't experience anything. And we need to rent the room. It's hard enough running a hostel on these margins without having rooms sit empty." Jake felt cold. "What happened here?" During World War II, this building was used as a temporary prison. People were held here before being transported elsewhere. Many didn't survive. Room 42 was one of the holding cells. Jake checked out immediately. He didn't care that he'd paid for 3 nights. He grabbed his backpack and found another hostel, paying triple the price for a private room. That night, safely alone in his new accommodation, he researched the old hostel. He found a blog post from another traveler who'd stayed in room 42. Their experience was identical. Empty room, then one by one. Figures appearing in the beds during the night, all facing away, all silent. Another review mentioned hearing whispers in Czech, even though the reviewer didn't speak the language. They'd recorded it and had someone translate. "Don't let them take me. Please don't let them take me." Jake realized what he'd witnessed. Room 42 held the memories of people who'd been imprisoned there. People who'd spent their last nights in that room before being taken away. Every night, they returned to those beds, reliving their final moments of waiting in fear. He never went back to that hostel. He couldn't. The image of those 7 figures, all facing away, all silent, haunted him. He wondered if they knew he was there, if they were aware of him watching, or if they were trapped in their own loop of terror, forever waiting for dawn and what horrors it would bring. Some buildings remember. Some places hold on to their past so tightly that the past becomes present, replaying endlessly for anyone unlucky enough to witness it. Jake finished his Europe trip, but couldn't enjoy it the same way. Every hostel dorm room made him anxious. Every sleeping stranger made him wonder if they were really there. Because once you've seen the thin line between past and present, you can never fully trust your eyes again. Story 8. The Safari Camp. Nicole and her husband James booked a luxury safari in Kenya for their 30th birthdays, both falling within the same week. The camp was advertised as an authentic African experience. Canvas tents, open-air dining, and nighttime sounds of the savannah. It cost a small fortune, but they wanted something unforgettable. They arrived at the camp after a bumpy 6-hour drive from Nairobi. The camp sat in a remote area of Masai Mara, miles from any town. 12 luxury tents were spread across a clearing, each elevated on wooden platforms with views of the grasslands. A main lodge housed the dining area and bar. Their tent was at the far edge of camp, number 12, the most private spot. Inside, it was surprisingly luxurious. A real bed with mosquito netting, a sitting area, and an ensuite bathroom with hot water. The front of the tent could be unzipped completely, opening up to a private deck with 2 chairs. "This is amazing," Nicole said, taking in the view of endless golden grassland and acacia trees. Their guide, Emmanuel, explained the camp rules. Stay on the paths after dark. Never leave your tent at night without an escort, and if you hear animals nearby, stay inside and don't make noise. The lions and hyenas hunt at night, he said seriously. We have security guards patrolling, but Africa is wild. Respect that. That first evening, they had dinner with the other guests around a large fire pit. Everyone shared their excitement about the upcoming game drives. Nicole and James met a honeymooning couple from Australia, a family from Germany, and 2 solo travelers from Canada. Everyone seemed friendly and adventurous. After dinner, Emmanuel walked them back to their tent with a flashlight, pointing out the stars and teaching them to identify animal calls in the darkness. "That's a hyena," he said, as a whooping call echoed across the grassland. Far away. Nothing to worry about. Back in their tent, Nicole and James changed into pajamas and climbed into bed under the mosquito netting. The sounds of the African night surrounded them. Insects chirping, the distant grunt of a hippo, mysterious rustles in the grass. "This is incredible," James whispered, holding Nicole's hand. They fell asleep to nature's symphony. Nicole woke at 1 a.m. to new sounds. Heavy footsteps were walking around their tent, circling slowly. Not human footsteps. These were heavier, 4-legged, accompanied by deep breathing. She shook James awake. They both lay frozen, listening. Whatever it was circled twice more, then stopped at the front of the tent. They could see its shadow against the canvas, backlit by the security lights near the main lodge. A massive shape, easily 6 feet tall at the shoulder. An elephant? A buffalo? Something big. The shadow moved closer. They heard sniffing at the tent's base, investigating their scent. "Should we call someone?" Nicole whispered. "Our phones don't work out here, remember?" No signal. They waited, barely breathing. After what felt like an eternity, the shadow moved away. They heard it walking off into the darkness, heavy footfalls fading. "Jesus," James breathed. That was intense. In the morning, they told Emmanuel about the nighttime visitor. He examined the ground around their tent and frowned. "These tracks. I'm not sure what made them. Too big for a lion, but the shape is wrong for an elephant or buffalo." Could it have been a person? Nicole asked. Emmanuel shook his head. No person is that large, and no person would be foolish enough to walk around camp at night on foot. Too dangerous. They went on their morning game drive and saw incredible wildlife. Lions lounging in the shade, elephants at a watering hole, giraffes moving gracefully across the plains. Nicole tried to forget about the nighttime visitor, but that night, it returned. Same time, 1 a.m. Same heavy footsteps circling. Same sniffing at the tent walls. But this time, it didn't leave after a few minutes. It stayed, moving back and forth along the tent's perimeter for over an hour. Nicole needed to use the bathroom desperately, but there was no way she was leaving the bed. She held it until the sun finally rose and the footsteps retreated. At breakfast, the German family mentioned their tent had been circled too. So had one of the Canadian travelers. All 3 tents were on the far edge of camp, like Nicole and James's. Something is stalking us, Nicole said to Emmanuel. What is it? Emmanuel called a meeting of the camp staff. They discussed in rapid Swahili, their expression serious. Finally, Emmanuel turned to the guests. We have a problem. There is something in the area that is not normal wildlife. The security guards have seen it too. They say it walks on 4 legs but stands taller than any animal they know. It watches the camp from the tree line. What do you mean, not normal wildlife? James asked. One of the older Maasai guards spoke up in halting English. It is Nandi bear. Very rare, very dangerous. Our elders speak of it. Attacks people sometimes. We must be very careful. Nicole Googled Nandi bear on her phone when they got weak Wi-Fi near the lodge. It was a cryptid, a legendary creature from East African folklore, described as a large, aggressive, bear-like animal that attacked humans. Sightings were rare and mostly dismissed as myth, but the security guards all agreed they'd seen something. Something that shouldn't exist. That night, the camp management moved Nicole and James to tent number 3, closer to the main lodge. But it didn't matter. At 1 a.m., the footsteps returned. This time, they came right up to the tent door. They heard breathing inches away from the canvas. Then they heard something new, scratching. Long claws raking slowly down the tent wall, tearing small holes in the fabric. Nicole grabbed James's arm so hard she left bruises. They watched in horror as 3 claw marks appeared in the tent canvas, moonlight streaming through the tears. The scratching continued, methodically working its way around the tent, testing for weaknesses. If it wanted to get in, the canvas wouldn't stop it. James grabbed the air horn they'd been given for emergencies and blasted it. The sound was deafening in the small space. The scratching stopped immediately. They heard running footsteps, not away but toward them. Security guards arrived within seconds, shouting and shining bright flashlights. Nicole and James burst out of their tent and ran to the main lodge. Other guests emerged too, woken by the commotion. The guards searched the area and found tracks. Deep impressions in the soft earth, clawed prints that didn't match any known animal, and blood on the grass fresh and still wet. Something was injured, Emmanuel said grimly, but we didn't shoot anything. This blood is not from our bullets. One guard found more blood leading into the bush. They followed it carefully with guns ready. After 50 yards, the blood trail simply ended. No body, no animal. Just blood drops that stopped as if whatever was bleeding had vanished into thin air. The camp management offered to move all guests to a hotel in the nearest town, an hour away. Nicole and James took that offer immediately. So did the German family and both Canadians. The Australian honeymooners decided to stay. insisting they didn't believe in monsters. Nicole and James spent the rest of their safari at a different camp, one with solid buildings instead of tents. It was less authentic, but infinitely less terrifying. 3 weeks later, back home in London, Nicole received an email from Emmanuel. The Australian couple had disappeared on their last night at the original camp. They'd gone to bed in Tent 12, Nicole and James's original tent, and were gone by morning. No signs of struggle, no blood, no tracks, just empty beds and 3 long scratches on the inside of the tent wall, as if they'd tried to claw their way out. The camp closed permanently after that. The insurance company wouldn't cover it anymore after multiple incidents. Local Maasai elders performed a cleansing ceremony, but they warned that some things cannot be cleansed, only avoided. Nicole still dreams about those footsteps circling in the dark. She dreams about those claws scratching through canvas, and she wonders what that Australian couple saw in their final moments, when whatever had been circling finally decided to stop hunting and start feeding. Africa is beautiful, but it's wild in ways tourists can never fully understand, and some creatures that live there don't exist in any guidebook, because acknowledging them would mean admitting that humans aren't always the top predator. Story 9. The Mountain Lodge. Ryan joined 4 college friends for a weekend ski trip in the Swiss Alps. They'd rented a small lodge halfway up the mountain, accessible by cable car and then a 10-minute hike. The lodge was isolated but beautiful, with stunning views and enough space for 5 people. They arrived Friday evening, taking the last cable car up. The weather was perfect, clear skies and fresh powder. The lodge had everything they needed: a fireplace, a full kitchen, comfortable beds, and huge windows showcasing the mountain vista. "Best ski trip ever," his friend Marcus declared, cracking open a beer. They spent Friday night drinking, playing cards, and planning the next day's skiing. Around midnight, they all went to bed. Ryan shared a room with Marcus. Their friends Tyler, Josh, and Connor took the other 2 bedrooms. Ryan woke at 2 a.m. to the sound of the front door opening. He heard footsteps in the main room, heavy boots on the wooden floor. He assumed one of his friends had gone outside for some reason, maybe to check on the weather or to smoke. He rolled over and tried to go back to sleep. But the footsteps didn't stop. They walked back and forth across the main room for several minutes. Then they started going up and down the stairs. Up, pause, down. Over and over, Ryan sat up. "Marcus, you awake?" "Yeah," Marcus whispered from the other bed. "Someone's walking around out there." "I thought it was one of the guys." "All night?" "For 20 minutes?" Ryan checked his phone. 2:22 a.m. He got up and opened their bedroom door. The main room was dark. He could see the outline of furniture in the moonlight streaming through the windows. "No one was there? Hello?" he called softly. The footsteps stopped. Ryan walked into the main room and turned on the lights. Empty. He checked the other bedrooms. Tyler, Josh, and Connor were all in their beds, sound asleep. "Maybe the wind?" Marcus suggested when Ryan returned. But Ryan had heard boots on wood. That wasn't wind. They went back to bed, but Ryan couldn't sleep. At 3 a.m., the footsteps returned. This time, they climbed the stairs and stopped right outside their bedroom door. Ryan could see the shadow of feet in the gap under the door. Someone was standing there, motionless. "Hey," Ryan shouted. "This isn't funny." The shadow didn't move. Marcus grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight. Ryan yanked open the door. The hallway was empty. "What the fuck?" Marcus breathed. They woke the others and told them what was happening. Everyone was now alert and a little scared. Josh suggested it might be another hiker or skier who'd taken shelter in the lodge. "The door was locked," Ryan said. "I checked before we went to bed." They searched the entire lodge together, turning on every light, checking closets and the basement storage area. No one else was there. The front door was still locked from the inside. All windows were closed and latched. "Someone's messing with us," Connor said, though he didn't sound convinced. They tried to go back to sleep, but at 4 a.m., something new happened. All 5 bedroom doors slammed shut simultaneously, as if blown by a massive gust of wind. But there was no wind. The lodge was sealed tight against the mountain cold. Ryan tried to open his door. It wouldn't budge, as if someone was holding it shut from the other side. He could hear his friends shouting from their rooms, "Same problem. Push harder," Marcus yelled. Both of them threw their weight against the door. It suddenly released, sending them stumbling into the hallway. The other bedroom doors flew open at the same moment and his friends tumbled out. "We need to leave," Tyler said, his face pale. "I don't care if it's the middle of the night. We're leaving." They grabbed their essential belongings, threw on coats, and headed for the front door. Ryan pulled it open and immediately recoiled. A man stood on the porch, facing away from them, looking out at the mountain. He wore old-fashioned ski clothes, the kind from maybe the 1970s, a thick wool sweater and canvas pants. His skin was gray, almost blue, and covered in a layer of frost. "Excuse me," Ryan said cautiously. "Are you okay?" The man didn't respond or turn around. He just stood there frozen, staring at the darkness. "Sir?" Josh tried. Still nothing. Tyler reached out to tap the man's shoulder. The moment his finger touched the sweater, the man collapsed like a puppet with cut strings, falling straight down and disappearing into the snow. Not falling onto the snow, into it. He vanished as if he'd never been there. "Run!" Marcus screamed. They ran down the mountain path in the dark, using phone flashlights to see. The cable car station was 10 minutes away, but it had stopped running hours ago. They'd have to wait until 6 a.m. for the first car down. They huddled in the small station building, doors locked, lights on. Every few minutes, they'd hear footsteps crunching through the snow outside, circling the building. But when they looked, nothing was there. At 5:30 a.m., they saw something that made their blood run cold. In the growing dawn light, they could see the lodge they'd just fled. Someone was standing in the upstairs window, looking down at them. The man in the wool sweater. He was inside the lodge now, watching them from the room they'd slept in. As they watched, more figures appeared in the other windows. 5 people total, all standing motionless, all staring down at the cable car station. The moment the cable car started running, they got on and never looked back. At the base, they went straight to the rental office to report what happened. The manager listened to their story with a grave expression. When they finished, he pulled out a file. "You're the 3rd group this season," he said. "We should have warned you, but the owner insists we rent the lodge. It's been a problem for years." "What happened there?" Ryan asked. The manager showed them an old newspaper article from 1974. 5 university students had rented the lodge for a ski trip. They were caught in an unexpected blizzard and ran out of firewood. The temperatures dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius. They froze to death waiting for rescue that came too late. "Their bodies were found in the exact rooms you slept in," the manager said. "Ever since, people report hearing footsteps, seeing figures, doors slamming. The students are still there, still waiting for help that never comes." Ryan and his friends cut their trip short and went home. They'd paid for 3 nights but couldn't stay even one more minute in that cursed place. Marcus had nightmares for months about that gray, frost-covered face. Tyler couldn't shake the image of those 5 figures standing in the windows, watching silently. Josh developed severe anxiety about cold weather, convinced that freezing to death was the worst way to go. Ryan sometimes thinks about those students. They were just like him and his friends, college kids looking for fun on a ski trip. They had no idea their weekend getaway would become their tomb. And now they're trapped in an endless loop, reliving that night, walking the lodge, waiting for rescue that will never arrive. The lodge still gets rented out. The owner changed the name and doesn't mention the history in the listing. Every season, new groups of tourists arrive, hoping for a mountain adventure. Most leave earlier than planned, spooked by things they can't explain, because some places hold on to death so tightly that the dead can never leave. They're bound there by tragedy, forced to repeat their final moments forever. And sometimes, the living stumble into that repetition, becoming witnesses to a horror that should have ended decades ago. Ryan never went skiing again. The mountains that once represented freedom and adventure now only remind him of cold, of death, and of 5 gray faces watching from dark windows as dawn broke over the snow. Story 10. The rental car. Stephanie was driving solo through the Scottish Highlands, a solo road trip she'd planned for years. She'd rented a small car at the Edinburgh airport and set off with a vague itinerary. Drive north, stop at scenic spots, stay in B&Bs, and enjoy the solitude. The first 2 days were magical. Rolling green hills, ancient castles, friendly locals, and breathtaking views at every turn. She felt free and alive in a way she hadn't in years. On day 3, she was driving on a remote single-track road in the Northern Highlands. The landscape was beautiful but desolate. No houses, no other cars, just endless moorland stretching in every direction. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, and a light rain had started to fall. Around 4 p.m., still driving, Stephanie noticed something odd. A smell in the car. Faint at first, then stronger. It smelled like wet dog mixed with something rotten, something dead. She checked the car, thinking maybe she'd picked up roadkill on her tires. Nothing. She checked her luggage in the back seat, wondering if food had spoiled. Nothing there either. But the smell was getting worse, making her gag. She rolled down the windows despite the rain, letting cold air blast through the car. It helped a little, but the smell persisted. Then she heard it. Breathing. Not her own. Someone else's breath, slow and raspy, coming from the back seat. Stephanie's eyes shot to the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty except for her backpack and jacket, but she could still hear breathing, clear as day, right behind her. Her heart hammered in her chest. She was on a deserted road miles from anywhere. If someone was hiding in her car, she was in serious danger. "I can hear you," she said, her voice shaking. "Show yourself or I'm calling the police." No response, just that awful breathing. She pulled over, grabbed her phone, and jumped out of the car. She yanked open the back door, ready to run if someone lunged at her. The back seat was empty. Completely empty. She checked under the seats, in the trunk, everywhere someone could possibly hide. No one. But when she got back in the driver's seat, she heard it again. Breathing. Closer now, right in her ear. She screamed and threw herself out of the car again. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone. She called the rental company. "There's something wrong with my car," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need to exchange it." The rental agent sighed. "We don't have any locations in the Highlands, ma'am. You'd have to drive back to Edinburgh or Inverness." "I can't drive this car. Something's wrong with it. Is it making mechanical noises?" "No. I think there's something in the car with me." The line was quiet for a moment. "Ma'am, are you feeling all right? Do you need medical assistance?" Stephanie knew how crazy she sounded. "Never mind. I'll figure it out." She hung up and stood in the rain, staring at the rental car. It looked normal, just a regular blue Toyota. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong with it. She had no choice but to keep driving. She was still an hour from the nearest town. She got back in, turned up the radio, loud to drown out any sounds, and drove as fast as she dared on the narrow road. The breathing continued. Sometimes it sounded like it was right behind her head. Other times it came from the passenger seat, but it never stopped. As the sun began to set, Stephanie reached a small town with a pub and a few shops. She pulled into the pub parking lot and practically ran inside. The warmth and light and normal people immediately made her feel better. She ordered a whiskey and tried to calm down. Just stress, she told herself. Long drive, isolated roads, too much time alone. You're imagining things. When she went back to the car an hour later, she noticed something she'd missed before. A stain on the back seat. Dark brown, almost black. It had been hidden under her jacket before. She touched it. Dry, but definitely a stain. A big one, spreading across the entire seat. In the pub, she asked the bartender if he knew anything about the rental company. I know them, he said. Edinburgh-based. They run a cheap operation. Sometimes rent cars that should have been scrapped. Have you heard anything? Weird about their cars? The bartender gave her a strange look. What kind of weird? Just, anything unusual? He leaned in. Well, there was a story a few years back. One of their rental cars was involved in an accident on the A9. Driver died. Head-on collision. They supposedly fixed the car and put it back in the rental fleet. Caused a bit of controversy because the car had significant damage. But they needed the inventory. Stephanie felt cold. What kind of car? Blue Toyota, I think. Sedan. She looked out the window at her rental car. Blue Toyota sedan. Do you know where the driver died? Back seat, I heard. Wasn't wearing a seatbelt. Went through the windshield but was pulled back in somehow. Made quite a mess. The stain, the breathing, the smell. Stephanie understood now. She wasn't imagining it. Something remained in that car. Some echo of the person who'd died there. She paid for her drink and walked slowly back to the car. She didn't want to get in, but she had no choice. All her belongings were in there, and she needed to reach her B&B for the night. She opened the door and paused. The smell was overwhelming now. And in the reflection of the window, just for a second, she saw someone sitting in the back seat. A man with blood on his face, staring at her with empty eyes. She blinked and he was gone. Stephanie drove to her B&B with tears streaming down her face, talking to herself the whole way to keep from screaming. Every time she glanced in the rearview mirror, she expected to see that bloody face staring back. She made it to the B&B and told the owner she needed to call a taxi to the nearest city. She abandoned the rental car in the parking lot with the keys on the seat. She'd pay whatever fees the rental company charged. She didn't care. She would never get in that car again. The rental company did charge her for early termination, for abandoning the vehicle, and for cleaning fees because of the mess she'd left. Stephanie didn't argue. She just paid and tried to forget. But she never could forget. Even now, years later, she can't ride in the back seat of any car without feeling anxious. She hears breathing sometimes in quiet moments and has to remind herself she's alone. She learned later that 3 other renters had complained about the same car. All of them reported similar experiences: the smell, the breathing, the sense of a presence. The rental company always dismissed it as psychological, stress from driving in unfamiliar areas. They're still renting that car. Stephanie checked. It's still in their fleet, available to book online for just $25 per day, a bargain price that should make anyone suspicious. Because some vehicles carry more than passengers. They carry memories of what happened in them. And when death occurs in a small enclosed space, sometimes that death refuses to be cleaned away. It soaks into the seats, into the metal and plastic, waiting for the next unsuspecting driver to feel its presence and understand that they're never truly alone. Stephanie never took another road trip. The freedom she'd sought on those Highland roads turned into a prison of fear. And every time she sees a blue Toyota, her heart races and she smells that awful smell again, reminding her that some nightmares follow you home. Finally, 10 vacations, 10 nightmares. Some people never made it home. These stories are real. The names changed, but the terror wasn't. Right now, someone is checking into a room where something waits in the darkness. Someone is boarding a train where they won't be alone. Someone is renting a car that still remembers its last passenger. It could be you next. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, run. Because the scariest part of traveling isn't getting lost. It's what finds you when you do.